The Seattle Seahawks finished the 2023 season with a 9-8 record and missed the playoffs for the second time in 3 seasons. It was an up and down year for this team as they started out with a 5-2 record with wins over teams like the Lions and Browns, before dropping 5 of their next 6 games to fall to 6-7, and then ultimately winning 3 of their final 4 games to finish the year with a 9-8 record. It was frustrating for the Seahawks and their fan base because every time they'd do something right and take a step in the right direction and look like a team that could win a playoff game, they would take not just one but multiple steps back and be back to square one. And while I don't think the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl this year, spoiler, I think they are a bit underrated heading into the season, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if this team made the playoffs this year. This was a team that finished 25th in points allowed per game last year, and they brought in one of the best defensive minds in all of football in Mike Macdonald to be their next head coach. And while the return on investment may not be immediate this year, in the sense of winning playoff games, I do think he will be a great coach for them in the long run. But that brings us to the question of how far can Seattle actually go this year? Well, we're going to break everything down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by breaking down what the Seahawks did in free agency, both in terms of who they signed and who they lost. And the biggest contract they shelled out was to veteran defensive lineman Leonard Williams. Personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Leonard Williams trade when it was made because of what they gave up to get him, knowing they were going to have to pay him shortly after the season. And Leonard is a solid player and has been throughout his entire NFL career, but he's not a true game-changing guy, and I wasn't the biggest fan of trading a second-round pick for a player who was turning 30 the following offseason in a situation where you had to pay him because there was no chance the Seahawks were going to trade a second-round pick for a half-a-season rental. That left the ball completely in Leonard's court in free agency / contract negotiations, and Leonard signed a 3-year, $64.5 million contract with 43.8 of it being guaranteed. And their biggest weakness entering this year, which was stopping the run, was addressed by bringing in former Texas defensive tackle Byron Murphy with their first-round pick in the 2024 draft. They also brought in veteran Jonathan Hankins in free agency too. Seattle brought in former Dolphin linebacker Jerome Baker after 2020 first-round pick Jordan Brooks signed with Miami, so Miami and Seattle essentially swapped inside linebackers for the upcoming season, and I think Baker is a solid linebacker, and they signed him to a 1-year deal. If Baker works out, then Seattle will probably look to sign him to another 1-year deal, or maybe even try and lock him in for a few years. And one of the things that has to be remembered for the Seahawks, not just entering the 2024 season, but from a long-term perspective, is what John Schneider and Mike Macdonald are building is not going to be an overnight change. With Seattle bringing in guys like safety Rayshawn Jenkins, who signed a 2-year deal this offseason, or linebacker Tyrell Dodson, what needs to be remembered is this team had just 2 picks in the top 100 this year, and I'm sure that's not how Mike Macdonald wants his drafts to go moving forward. Safety Rayshawn Jenkins came over from the Jags and will turn 31 in January, and only 1 of his 2 years are guaranteed on his contract, so he's probably not going to be a long-term solution. At least he shouldn't be viewed as a long-term solution moving forward. One thing that needs to be noted or remembered with the 2024 Seahawks is they have the 12th most dead money entering the year at over $36 million. 20.8 of that $36 million comes from Jamal Adams, who recently signed with the Titans. Former safety Quandre Diggs allocates another 10.2 of the $36 million, and that's a tough blow for Seattle when you have over $31 million wrapped up in 2 safeties who aren't even on the team. No matter how good of a GM or head coach you have, that's going to naturally put a team behind the 8 ball in the grand scheme of things. They also lost former guard Damian Lewis in free agency to the Panthers, who signed a 4-year, $53 million contract to go to Carolina. They lost tight end Colby Parkinson, who signed with the Rams, tight end Will Dissly, who signed with the Chargers, linebacker Bobby Wagner, who signed with the Commanders, and backup quarterback Drew Lock, who signed with the Giants. In addition to the players we've discussed, they brought back Noah Fant on a 2-year deal, and brought back veteran tackle George Fant on a 2-year deal as well, which I loved for a few reasons. The biggest, of course, is you can never have enough depth along the offensive line in today's era, and starting right tackle Abraham Lucas struggled when he came back from injury during the final few games of the 2023 season, and having an insurance plan in place is big for any team in a 17-game season. Now, for the Seahawks defense entering 2024, this is a unit I am excited for. I absolutely loved the Seahawks selection of UTSA corner Tariq Woolen during the 2022 draft, and in 2022, he had 6 interceptions and had another solid year last year too. The one knock on Woolen is his tackling, which can certainly be an issue at times, and he was credited with missing 13 tackles last year. And while being able to consistently wrap up and make tackles is obviously important, and I don't want to dismiss that, especially for a defensive player, Tariq is paid to shut opposing receivers down. And just because the interception numbers weren't there in 2023, like they were in 2022, doesn't mean he had a bad year. And in fact, in true man-to-man coverage last year, Tariq actually had the highest coverage grade amongst all corners, even higher than fellow 2022 draftee Sauce Gardner, and this is per PFF. The reality is teams did not test him, and they would rather go elsewhere, which presents another challenge, and that's because of the number 5 overall pick from last year's draft, Devin Witherspoon. There's not much more to say than Devin Witherspoon is an absolute beast. He only had 1 interception during his rookie year, but it was a notable one, as it was a pick 6 against the Giants on Monday Night Football. And that game was the moment Devin arrived. He had 7 tackles, 3 quarterback hits, 2 sacks, and a 97-yard pick 6 in his 3rd career NFL game. As long as he stays healthy, the sky is the limit for him, and I truly believe that. I don't think it's fair to have Devin as my breakout player for the Seahawks, the number 5 overall pick from last year who had a great rookie season. He just didn't get the public recognition like he should have, but I don't think it's crazy to say he could be a consensus top 5 corner by the end of the 2024 season. Tariq and Devin are one of my favorite corner duos in the league, and it's going to be a no-fly zone out there, which is why it's so important for the 2024 Seahawks defense to not be abysmal against the run. And what's funny is we said the same thing about the 2023 Seahawks, just don't be bad against the run and you're going to win at least 9 games. In back-to-back years now, they finished 26th or worst in every rushing category, including 31st in rushing yards allowed last year and 30th in rushing touchdowns allowed. And that's the big question for this team entering the year, is to what ability can they stop the run? Because they have serviceable players on the interior. Jaron Reed and Leonard Williams are okay players to have along the defensive line, and I think Byron Murphy will soon be a household name that teams regret passing on. He's going to be a good player for the Seahawks in the long run. I also really like the depth they have in the trenches with Leonard, Jaron, Byron, Draymond Jones, and Jonathan Hankins, and I have no doubt that this team can and will routinely get after the quarterback. This team had 4 players have 40 or more pressures last year in Reed, Jones, Williams, and Boye Mafe, who is very underrated around the league, and that's not going to be a problem for them this year, especially with Mike Macdonald as the team's head coach. Macdonald is a genius in terms of scheming his guys open and with how he runs simulated pressures, and that's not going to change just because he doesn't have Roquan Smith or Kyle Hamilton on this team. Ravens players have attributed their team's success last year, some of it, not all of it of course, to Macdonald teaching his defense and making it extremely easy to remember calls. Whether it was a 4-man pressure with an edge dropping back and having a safety rush, which throws opposing offensive linemen off because they certainly aren't expecting that, or any variation of a blitz package. The Seahawks defense has a lot of talented players, truly, and the 2 big questions for them entering the year is how are they going to be able to stop the run, and how quickly are they going to be able to learn Mike Macdonald's system. And stopping the run in this division especially is critical because the 49ers, Rams, and Cardinals are all going to try to run the football, and a lot. And those are 2 questions none of us know the answer to. But if they can even be slightly below league average, meaning around 20th or 22nd in rushing defense, as opposed to 29th or 30th, then they're going to improve in a big way. And if they do, then the sky is the limit for this team. And this is why I think the Seahawks are an incredibly underrated team heading into 2024. I am very excited for the 2024 Seahawks offense and how they play under new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, but one thing that's going to have to go their way that did not go their way last year is injury or health. At one point, they had a 41-year-old Jason Peters playing for them, and not just for a spot start. I mean, Jason Peters played multiple games for this team. They also had 2021 6th-round pick Stone Forsythe play several games for them along the offensive line as well. And Jason was an undrafted free agent back in 2004, meaning he was a part of the draft class that Eli, Phillip, Big Ben, Larry Fitzgerald, all of those guys were a part of, and Jason Peters was still out there last year at 41 years old playing along the offensive line. Now, as you can probably imagine, Jason was not as effective at 41 years old as he was at 29, 30, and even into his mid-30s, Jason was a very good player, and he's a 9-time Pro Bowler and a 6-time All-Pro, and he will eventually be in Canton, but at 41 years old, that was not a recipe for success. So that is going to be the big thing for the 2024 Seahawks, is being able to stay healthy along the offensive line. Quite frankly, I think this unit is a lot more talented than being 17th in points per game, which is where they were last year, and I think Geno can get back, or at least very close, to the player he was in 2022, and the player Geno was in 2022 was a very, very talented player. I mean, Geno hit hole shots, and he hit throws that not a lot of quarterbacks in the league could, and when you combine that with having DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who should step up, one more year of Tyler Lockett, and then, of course, the running back duo of Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, I mean, I really can't say enough good things about the 2024 Seahawks offense. And one thing I am looking forward to with the 2024 Seahawks offense is how Ryan Grubb utilizes his skill position players. He had 3 receivers get selected in the top 100 last year from Washington in Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. And when you have 3 receiver sets like the Huskies did last year, that's only going to translate during his time as an OC with the Seahawks, because he's effectively going to have DK Metcalf be what Rome Odunze was last year, and then have Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith-Njigba be similar to what Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan were, and also that in turn benefits both Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Now, I have said before that I was a little disappointed with the 2023 Seahawks run game. Of course, that can be attributed to the revolving door around the offensive line. So again, first and foremost, health along the offensive line is going to be most important, but if they are relatively healthy, and by the way, I absolutely loved the recent addition of Connor Williams, and I think that was a tremendous signing this late in free agency, or this early in the 2024 season, if you will, but as long as the offensive line is relatively healthy, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this offense will have 2 600-plus yard running backs in Kenneth and Zach. And in that scenario being played out, I think Kenneth would easily go for over 1,000 yards. It is pretty crazy. The Seahawks finished 17th in points per game last year, and I think they are a tad underrated heading into the year, because I think there's this belief, not from me, but I think nationally, that some people think that Geno was still a little bit of a one-year wonder when not factoring in how many things went against the Seahawks having consecutive or sustained success last year. So I think the Seahawks are going to surprise a lot of people offensively, and from a stat projection standpoint, I think Geno will be around 4,200 yards, which is where he was back in 2022, and I think he'll be around 25 to 27 touchdowns, and I think DK Metcalf is at a point where he's not just this 6'4", 230-pound straight line guy. I think DK does not get enough credit for how he separates downfield, and I think there's a couple routes in particular where DK creates a lot of separation naturally, and I really, really like his game and how he's evolved since being that guy back in 2019 when he was a draft prospect. I think DK is a very not underrated, but kind of underappreciated player in a receiving era where there are so many guys, but I think DK will be over 1,000 yards again, and I think this will be kind of the passing of the torch year from Tyler Lockett to Jackson Smith-Njigba. So I think there's a very real possibility the Seahawks have 2 900-plus yard receivers, with DK, of course, going for over 1,000, and then, of course, have the 1,000-yard rusher in Kenneth Walker, and have the 4,000-yard passer in Geno Smith. I also think Noah Fant is a little bit better than what the stat sheet shows, as he's not been a particularly productive player since joining the Seahawks, although I think if he were in the right offense, he could have 600 or 700 yards receiving. I just think he's kind of the guy that gets the short end of the stick, unfortunately for Seattle, but I think DK will be around 1,150 or 1,200 yards, along with 9 or 10 touchdowns, and I think JSN will have around 950 yards this year. The Seahawks offense, barring health along the offensive line, should finish top 12 or 13 in points per game this year. The 2024 Seahawks rookie impact is probably not going to be where other teams' rookie impacts are, and that's fine. Now, whenever you hear that, you may think, well, did they draft a bust? Did they just have a bad draft class? No, I don't think that's the case. I like Byron Murphy a lot, but what needs to be remembered is he is a defensive tackle, and they generally take longer to develop, which is fine. And what I think Byron Murphy will be in the long run, at least best case scenario, is what Justin Madubuike currently is for the Ravens, and I think that was the vision that Mike Macdonald had for him when they made the selection. So maybe a slower year one. I still think there will be flashes in year one, and if he can have 30, 35 pressures, maybe 4 sacks as a rookie, that would be a very productive rookie season for Byron. Now, the Seahawks, of course, did not have a second-round pick because of the Leonard Williams trade, but they drafted Christian Haynes in the 3rd round, and I think Christian will eventually start games for this team, but probably not as a rookie. At least you'd kind of hope not as a rookie, not because you want a player to be a draft bust or disappointment, but that would mean a starter either severely disappointed or, like last year, went down with injury. Now, after that, Tyrese Knight and AJ Barner are going to be depth pieces. I seriously would not expect too much out of them. But one corner that I like that they took in the 5th round, Seahawks fans, of course, know about corners in the 5th round, is Nehemiah Pritchett, the corner from Auburn. I think in some ways he reminds me, like from a playstyle standpoint, he reminds me a little bit of Devin Witherspoon, where I'm going to get in your face, I'm going to throw everything I have at you when I make a tackle, and that feisty mentality, but he's at minimum going to be the 3rd or 4th corner because of Tariq Woolen, because of Devin Witherspoon. So I wouldn't expect too much from him in year one, but I think he is a very high level development piece. But that's one player I am excited to watch develop over the next few years, and I really, really like the value that the Seahawks had on day 3 when they selected him. But aside from Byron, I wouldn't expect too much from this draft class in 2024, but again, that doesn't mean that they're going to be busts or that they're going to be disappointing players. It's the fact that they selected a lot of development pieces, and you need development pieces as an NFL team. And the Seahawks roster is pretty talented, and there weren't a lot of holes for rookies to come in and win starting jobs from day one, which is a testament to the talent that they have on the roster. So Seahawks fans, don't take it personally. I just don't think there's going to be a whole lot of rookie impact, especially on the stat sheet from day one, but I really like this class overall. The 2024 Seahawks schedule features teams like the 49ers and Rams twice, of course, the Lions, Dolphins, Bills, Falcons, Packers, Bears, and Jets, and it's going to be a difficult schedule to say the least. Now, they open the year against the Broncos and Patriots, and ultimately I think this team will start out 2-0, but where I'm really going to place a lot of stock for the 2024 Seahawks season is how they play in back-to-back weeks against the Dolphins and Lions in weeks 3 and 4. And in particular, the week 4 game against the Lions in primetime will be very fun to watch. Now, I'm not going to say their season is over if they drop both of those and fall to 2-2, but from that point on, it's very much going to be okay, great, you can beat the Broncos and Patriots of the world, but how are you going to play when you play the Falcons, Bills, Packers, and your division rivals, of course, the Rams and 49ers, a team that's been to the NFC Championship game in 4 of the past 5 years. That's going to be the big test for Seattle. They can't give up 25 plus points in consecutive weeks to the Dolphins and Lions and lose both of those. And if they lose both of those by at least a touchdown, I'm going to have a lot of questions for them, which I really can't wait to see how those games play out, because I am eager to see how Mike Macdonald attacks both of those offenses. But there is a particular stretch for the Seahawks where the schedule gets really, really tough for them, and they play in consecutive weeks the 49ers, Falcons, Bills, Rams, and 49ers. And then they have a Cardinals game in there, which they're not going to be an easy team to play, especially for Seattle, because of how well they run the football. And then they play the Jets. That 7-game span to me, is going to be really how the 2024 Seahawks season goes. Now, I definitely don't think they're going to go 0-7 in that span. That would be pretty ridiculous to say. But the week 3 and 4 and then that 7-game span is going to be deciding for me in terms of how the 2024 Seahawks season goes. Ultimately, I think this team will have a floor of 8 wins. I think there is far too much talent on this team, and coaching staff for that matter, to have less than 8 wins. But the team ceiling is a big question, because for a lot of people, it's, do you believe in Geno Smith? Do you believe in Ryan Grubb? And do you believe in Mike McDonald? Ultimately, I believe in all three. And having said that, I think their team ceiling will be around a divisional round exit. I like this team a lot, but I wouldn't trust them going into San Francisco and winning with the season on the line. We saw that a couple years ago in the wild card round, and it didn't play out. Granted, it's a new team, but I still think the result would be the same. Now, they can go into other stadiums and win. It's going to be tough, of course, but I think they're going to be around 9 wins, maybe 10, because the schedule is very difficult, and their schedule at the end is particularly difficult as they finish the year in Chicago and then in LA to play the Rams. So that's not going to be easy, to say the least. But I think they'll be around 9 wins, maybe 10, with the potential to win a playoff game. But that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 38% of people watching are subscribed and helps the channel tremendously. Also, please check out the Football Analysis Podcast. If you like this, you will love the podcast. And until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.